second in a series of 5 videos that briefly explain how to make 2 socks at the same time on double-pointed needles. They're made one inside the other, as demonstrated by the girl in this photo, taken around 1918, undoubtedly knitting socks for some soldier overseas. This method was used before circular needles were invented and would have been state-of-the-art efficiency for its time. Of course, the magic loop and 2 socks on 2 circular methods are both improvements over this method, as it's relatively easy to knit the 2 socks together by tangling the yarns from each sock together when you're using dpns. However, I believe that it's still a worthwhile pursuit to make a pair of socks this way, as it's yet another way to build on your knitting skill set and presents a unique challenge for those of us who enjoy the experience of facing the next challenge in building our knitting repertoire. In this video, we'll continue knitting the leg in stockinette like I've done with this pair of socks, which I've made using standard sock yarn on 2.25 millimeter needles. You'll see this is indeed one sock inside of the other. To begin, for the purpose of this demonstration, I'm going to be using worsted weight yarn and much larger dpns than I normally would. And I'm also going to be using 2 different colors of yarn so that you can distinguish between one sock and the other. This is going to be the outer sock in red and the inner sock or inside sock or back sock, sometimes I refer to it, in blue. To begin, I'll remind you of yarn placement when you're not knitting, as this is the key to avoiding disaster. The yarn for the front, or the outside sock, is always resting in the front of the work when it's not being used to create a stitch for the outside sock. And the yarn for the back, or the inside sock, is always resting at the back of your work when it's not being used to create a stitch for the inside sock. So to begin, I will knit the first stitch on the outside sock, which is the red yarn, bringing the yarn to the back of the work to knit as I normally would for any knit stitch. And when I'm finished making the stitch, I bring the yarn back to the front of the needle to rest. I'm going to make the first stitch on the inside sock. The yarn is already at the back, so it's perfectly placed for a knit stitch. And I leave it at the back to rest. And I'm knitting stockinette, so each stitch is going to be knit, as opposed to knit, purl, which is what I did for the ribbing at the beginning of the sock. So I bring the yarn to the back for the front sock to knit, and then I bring it forward again to rest. I knit the inside sock and leave the yarn at the back. Pick up the yarn for the outside sock, bring it to the back, knit, and bring it to the front. Now at some point you're going to be watching something wonderful on television, The Bachelor or something equally high-minded, and you're going to become distracted and you'll knit a stitch. Oops, I've got the tail going here. You'll knit a stitch, taking the yarn to the back, knitting the stitch, and then you'll forget to bring the yarn to the front. And in my next video, I'm going to show you what to do when you discover 3 or 4 rows into your sock that you knit your sock 1 and sock 2 together 4 rows back. It's not as much of a catastrophe as it sounds. It's really quite easy to repair it, particularly if you're an experienced knitter that's dropped stitches deliberately and picked them up again. Now, this, I should also mention, is not a pattern. What I'm doing is not meant to be followed as a pattern. It's just a small demonstration of the steps that you would normally use to to construct a pair of socks using sock yarn. It's just a lot easier to see worsted weight yarn on a video than it is to see sock weight yarn on a video. So that's what I've done, because what I'm going to end up with is two very useless socks about the size that my cat might wear if she were inclined, which I very, very much doubt. So happy knitting until you see the next video, or until you take your next challenge. And remember what Elizabeth Zimmerman said, there are no tears in knitting. So knit wherever you are without forgetting to get up and move once in a while, and enjoy the peace and the enjoyment that comes from making something handmade for someone you love.